For God's sake, General, are we seriously considering sending a flying tractor into a supersonic fight? That thing belongs in a museum, not on my asset list. And with all due respect, I need a pilot in that seat, not a high school kid who looks like she just got her driver's license. The crowd of pilots, a sea of olive-drab flight suits and polished egos, chuckled nervously. They all turned to look at the subject of Major Rex, Viper, Callahan's venomous tirade. She offered no reaction. Captain Eva Rostova stood near the back of the briefing room, a ghost in the harsh fluorescent light. Her flight suit, clean and perfectly maintained, seemed a size too large for her slight frame. The sleeves rolled with a precision that hinted at a deep, ingrained discipline. She didn't flinch. She didn't scowl. Her gaze remained fixed on the massive topographical map of the Zahir Valley dominating the main screen, her expression one of serene, almost unnerving calm. Her silence was a vacuum, pulling all the oxygen and arrogance out of Viper's outburst. But when the general, Marcus Thorne, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, saw the way she held herself, the subtle, perfect balance of her stance, the way her eyes traced the canyon contours not as a pilot, but as a predator, he felt a flicker of something ancient, a recognition of a kindred spirit. He said nothing, but his observation was a silent promise of a reckoning to come. If you believe that true strength is found not in the volume of the voice, but in the weight of the deed, type competence below. The air in the Combined Air Operations Center was thick with the metallic tang of stale coffee and rising panic. On the main screen, the live feed from a Reaper drone showed the impossible geography of the Serpent's Gulch, a jagged wound carved into the desolate landscape. Inside that wound, 3 trident symbols blinked red, indicating the pinned positions of SEAL Teams 2, 4, and 7. 578 men were trapped, their exfiltration route cut off by a heavily fortified, numerically superior enemy force that had materialized from the very rock itself. Major Callahan, pacing before the screen like a caged panther, continued his advocacy for a high-speed, high-altitude solution. He spoke of laser-guided munitions, of standoff capabilities, of the F-16's unparalleled ability to deliver ordnance and exit the kill box before the enemy even knew they were there. He was loud, confident, and utterly convincing to the room of young aviators who saw him as the apex of modern air power. He gestured dismissively toward Captain Rostova again, a theatrical flick of his wrist. We need speed and surprise, not a slow-moving target painting itself for every heavy machine gun in that valley. The A-10 is a relic of a bygone era, a blunt instrument for a surgical problem. His words were a performance, each syllable designed to cement his authority and ridicule the alternative. Yet, Rostova's silence persisted. It wasn't a passive silence. It was an active, listening silence. Her focus was absolute, her mind seemingly processing the flow of tactical data on a level no one else could perceive. While Viper sold his vision of a swift, clean, technological victory, Rostova was calculating wind shear within the canyon, mapping out potential enemy crossfire zones, and memorizing the exact placement of the rock formations that could provide momentary cover for an aircraft brave or foolish enough to fly below the ridgeline. The other pilots saw an unremarkable, quiet officer. General Thorne saw something else entirely. He saw the stillness of a master craftsman before a complex task, the profound calm of someone who had faced far worse than a condescending major and had not only survived, but prevailed. He saw a professional. And in that moment of condescending laughter and arrogant proclamations, a deep sense of injustice began to settle over the old general, a quiet certainty that assumptions were about to be shattered with the force of a 1,000-pound bomb. The initial plan, Viper's plan, was a catastrophic failure. 2 F-16s, sleek and deadly arrows of technological might, screamed over the Serpent's Gulch at over 500 knots. Their laser-guided bombs, the pride of the modern Air Force, were miracles of precision engineering. But the enemy was dug into the canyon walls, protected by deep overhangs and narrow, twisting caves that rendered the bomb's terminal guidance systems ineffective. The bombs either hit the top of the ridge, showering the SEALs with harmless debris, or overshot the targets entirely. The F-16s were simply too fast. They were trying to thread a needle in a hurricane, their pilots getting mere seconds of visual on the targets before they had to pull up to avoid slamming into the opposite canyon wall. Viper, flying lead, swore over the comms, his voice tight with frustration and disbelief. The enemy, emboldened, intensified their fire. The rhythmic chatter of heavy machine guns echoed up the canyon, and the dreaded, distinct thump of mortar launches began to punctuate the chaos. On the command center's audio feed, the SEAL commander's voice, once a paragon of battlefield calm, was becoming strained. Havoc Actual, this is Trident Lead. We are taking effective fire from all sides. My men are pinned. We cannot move. We are taking casualties. I say again, we are taking heavy casualties. Your fast movers are putting on a great air show, but they're not hitting a damn thing down here. The general's face was grim. The blinking red icons on the map now had smaller, amber icons appearing next to them, indicating wounded operators. The window for a successful rescue was closing with terrifying speed. He was about to make the call no commander ever wants to make, to sacrifice a few to save the many, to order a strategic withdrawal and leave the SEALs to their fate. The room was a tomb of silent dread. The earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of impending tragedy. It was in that precise moment of collective despair, when all hope seemed lost, that a single, quiet voice cut through the tension. "Sir." All eyes turned to Captain Rostova. She had moved, seemingly without making a sound, to the edge of the command platform. "Request permission to engage." She held a grease pencil in her hand, and with a steady, fluid motion, she drew a single, insane line on the tactical map, a line that didn't go over the Serpent's Gulch, but directly through it, a suicidal path that hugged the canyon floor. Viper, who had just landed and stormed back into the COC, scoffed audibly. "That's not flying, that's a suicide run. You'll rip your own wings off." Rostova's eyes didn't even flicker in his direction. They were locked on General Thorne, her gaze unwavering, a silent testament to her absolute certainty. The general looked from the desperate pleas of his men on the ground to the impossible line on the map, and then to the profound, unshakable competence radiating from the young captain. In her calm, he found a sliver of hope. "Put her in the air," he commanded, his voice a low growl that silenced all further argument. Now, the drone feed switched to follow the lone A-10 Thunderbolt II as it approached the canyon. It looked ancient, almost clumsy, compared to the F-16's. Its straight wings, designed for low-speed maneuverability, seemed primitive. Its two massive engines, mounted high on the fuselage, gave it an ungainly, brutish appearance. To the skeptical eyes in the CAOC, it was indeed a tractor heading into a Formula One race. Viper stood with his arms crossed, a smug, "I told you so" look on his face, waiting for the inevitable failure. But then, something extraordinary happened. As Captain Rostova, call sign Sprite, reached the canyon mouth, she didn't dive. She descended. She eased the Warthog down with impossible grace, her control inputs so fine they were imperceptible. The aircraft entered the canyon not with a roar, but with a whisper, flying so low that its shadow clung to the canyon floor. She was now below the ridgeline, invisible to long-range sensors, flying in a world of rock and shadow. The air inside the Serpent's Gulch was a treacherous soup of unpredictable crosswinds and updrafts. For an F-16, it would have been instantly fatal. For the A-10, in the hands of a master, it was a hunting ground. "Sprite, you're too low? Pull up." "Captain, that's an order." The general's voice boomed over the comms, his protective instinct overriding his tactical gamble. There was a click of the mic, and Rostova's voice, calm and even as a frozen lake, came back. "Negative, sir. I have the picture." And then she did something that defied the laws of aerodynamics. She dropped her flaps and slowed the aircraft to just above its stall speed, turning the 10-ton attack jet into a hovering, stable weapons platform. She was no longer just flying. She was prowling. The first enemy position, a heavy machine gun nest that had been tearing the SEALs to shreds, came into her sights. There was no missile launch, no high-tech explosion. There was only a sound that has been the stuff of nightmares for America's enemies for decades. BRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRR a terrifying, soul-shaking roar. On the screen, a stream of 30mm depleted uranium rounds, firing at a rate of 70 per second, walked directly into the enemy emplacement, turning rock, metal, and men into a cloud of vaporized dust. It was not an explosion, it was a deletion. She performed this act of surgical destruction again and again and again. She danced the warthog through the canyon, her movements of violent ballet. She jinked left to avoid incoming fire, the rocks of the canyon wall so close the drone could see their texture. She climbed just enough to bring her cannon to bear on a mortar pit, then dropped back to the floor, the mortar shell exploding harmlessly above her. She flew with a precision that was not human, a level of skill that no one in that room had ever witnessed. In the COC, there was a deafening silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of stunned onlookers. Viper's jaw was slack, his face pale, his arrogance completely sandblasted away by the raw, undeniable competence on the screen. The entire firefight, which had been a desperate struggle for survival, had lasted less than 90 seconds from the moment Rostova opened fire. A new voice crackled over the radio, filled with a raw, primal awe. It was the SEAL commander. Havoc Actual. I don't know who the hell that was. But tell them God came in a warthog. General Thorne moved with a purpose that commanded the attention of the entire room. He walked past the stunned pilots, past the shell-shocked Major Callahan, and stood directly in front of the main command console. His face was unreadable, a mask of hardened granite, but his eyes, fixed on the telemetry data streaming from Rostova's A-10, held a flicker of profound, almost reverent respect. He didn't speak. He simply pointed a single, weathered finger at the console operator. Pull up the service record for Captain Eva Rostova. Put it on the main screen. All of it. Override classification. The operator, a young airman, fumbled for a moment, his fingers trembling slightly under the weight of the general's command. A few keystrokes, a security override entered with the general's personal code, and the file appeared, replacing the drone feed of the now quiet canyon. At first, it looked unremarkable. Name: Rostova, Eva. Rank: Captain. Aircraft: A-10C. But then the details began to fill the screen, and a collective gasp rippled through the room. The silence of awe was replaced by a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. The data points appeared one by one, each a hammer blow to the foundation of their prejudice. Call sign: Sprite. Origin: not, as they had cruelly assumed, a reference to her small stature. It was an acronym used by a very specific, very secret community. It stood for Special Purpose Reconnaissance / Interdiction / Tactical Element. It was a designation given to a handful of pilots in the entire military, those who were attached to Tier 1 Special Operations units, pilots who flew missions that were never spoken of, in places that officially did not exist. The room grew colder, the weight of their ignorance pressing down on them. They had not just insulted a fellow pilot. They had mocked a phantom, a living legend hiding in plain sight. They had mistaken a dragon for a lizard. General Thorne let the information sink in, allowing the quiet data on the screen to completely dismantle the loud assumptions that had filled the room only an hour before. He watched as Viper's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a deep and profound shame. The Major wasn't just wrong. He was catastrophically, humiliatingly wrong, and his error had been broadcast on the largest screen in the command center. The general had orchestrated this reveal not out of cruelty, but out of a deep-seated need for institutional correction. It was a lesson, delivered with the precision of a laser-guided weapon, and its target was the corrosive arrogance that he saw as a greater threat than any enemy. The mystery of the quiet captain was being solved, not with a dramatic speech, but with the cold, hard, irrefutable facts of a hidden career spent at the very tip of the spear. Her silence was not shyness. It was the quiet confidence of the truly elite, the humility of one who has nothing to prove because her actions have already spoken volumes in the silent, forgotten battlefields of the world. The list of her accomplishments scrolled down the screen, each line more unbelievable than the last. Combat hours, over 4,000. A staggering number, but beside it was a note: classified sorties excluded. The implication was that her true flight time was far, far higher. Medals: Distinguished Flying Cross with V for Valor Device. The citation was heavily redacted, speaking only of actions in a non-permissive environment that resulted in the recovery of a high-value national asset. There were 7 separate air medals, a Bronze Star, even a Purple Heart, the details of which were completely blacked out. Special qualifications: Master of Low-Altitude Close Air Support. Graduate, United States Air Force Weapons School, a feat in itself. But below that was a line item that made several senior officers in the room physically recoil in disbelief. Graduate, Project Night Owl. Project Night Owl wasn't a real program. It was a myth, a ghost story pilots told each other. A rumored, ultra-classified aviation unit that took the top 1% of pilots and trained them to fly in ways that bent the known rules of physics and combat, specializing in deep insertion and extraction missions for JSOC. They were the pilots who were called when even the best weren't good enough. It was the stuff of legend, and they were looking at the service record of one of its graduates. The general finally keyed his microphone, his voice cutting through the stunned atmosphere and broadcasting to all channels, including Rostova's cockpit. Captain Rostova, well done. Disregard my last order. You had the better picture. The public retraction of a direct order from a commanding general was an act of humility and respect so profound it was almost unheard of. He continued, his voice resonating with authority. Bring our boys home. He then turned his gaze from the screen and let it sweep across the faces of every pilot in the room, finally landing, with immense weight, on Major Callahan. Assumptions kill, the general stated, his voice low and dangerous. Today, you all learned a lesson. You assumed that speed was the only metric of success. You assumed that new technology invalidates proven platforms. You assumed, he said, his eyes boring into Viper, that a pilot's stature, or their gender, or their quiet demeanor, determines their skill. He gestured toward the screen, which still displayed Rostova's incredible record. Captain Rostova just taught you a lesson in competence that you will carry for the rest of your careers. She didn't just fly that plane, she became one with it. That wasn't a flight plan, that was artistry, forged in crucibles you can't even imagine. She was quiet in this room because she has nothing to prove to any of you. Her proof is etched in the lives of the men she just saved, and in the wreckage of the enemies who made the same mistake you did. They underestimated her. The shame in the room was palpable, a physical force. The nervous laughter from earlier was a bitter memory, a stark reminder of their collective folly. The quiet captain, the ghost at the back of the room, had just become the most respected and feared pilot at the entire airbase without ever raising her voice. Her vindication was complete, delivered not by her own words, but by the undeniable truth of her legacy. The story of what happened in the Serpent's Gulch spread not like wildfire, but like a shockwave. It didn't travel through official channels, which remained tightly sealed by classification, but through the modern military's version of the tribal drum, the secure radio nets, the encrypted forums, and the hushed conversations in chow halls and ready rooms across the globe. The legend of the Sprite of the Serpent's Gulch was born. The SEALs from Teams 2, 4, and 7 spoke of it with a reverence usually reserved for mythological events. They didn't describe a plane. They described a guardian angel, a vengeful spirit that descended from the heavens in a machine that roared with righteous fury. They recounted how the streams of 30mm rounds impacted with such precision that they could feel the ground shake, yet not a single piece of shrapnel touched their positions. It was a story of impossible skill, of salvation delivered at the last possible second. The drone footage, though highly classified, was dissected by a select few at the highest levels of SOCOM and the Air Force. It became an object of intense study, a masterclass in aerial combat that defied conventional tactics. Pilots who watched it spoke of Rostova's flying not in technical terms, but in artistic ones. They talked about her rhythm, her flow, the way she made the 34,000-pound aircraft move like it was an extension of her own nervous system. The legend grew with each telling, cementing her status as a quiet professional of the highest order. She became a symbol, a powerful reminder that the most lethal warriors are often the ones you least expect. Her name became a shorthand for competence, a benchmark against which other pilots were measured. The story served as a powerful corrective, a dose of humility for the fighter-jock culture that often prized swagger over substance. It was a living testament to the idea that the platform, be it an old A-10 or a new F-35, is only as good as the warrior at its controls. The quiet captain, who had sought no attention, was now the center of it, yet she remained unchanged, a fixed point of calm professionalism in the whirlwind of her own burgeoning myth. Her legend wasn't just about a single battle. It was about the eternal truth of the warrior ethos, deeds, not words. The most profound change, however, was in Major Rex Viper Callahan. He was not formally demoted, but he received a public and scathing reprimand from General Thorne, a black mark on his record that would follow him for the rest of his career. The true punishment, though, was not institutional, it was internal. His arrogance, the very core of his identity, had been shattered. He had built his reputation on being the best, the fastest, the most modern pilot, and in 90 seconds, a quiet captain in an obsolete plane had shown him that he was none of those things. He had been humbled, and the experience reshaped him. A week after the incident, several junior pilots witnessed a scene they would never forget. Major Callahan approached Captain Rostova in the maintenance hangar. He didn't swagger. He didn't speak loudly. He stood before her, his posture deferential, and waited for her to acknowledge him. When she finally looked up from her pre-flight checks, he spoke, his voice quiet and stripped of all its former bravado. "Captain," he said, "I was wrong. What you did, I've never seen anything like it. I came here to apologize, and to ask if you would be willing to teach me what you know about close air support." Rostova simply nodded, her expression unchanging. "Yes, Major. Be at the simulators at 0500-inch." Her response was simple, professional, and devoid of any hint of triumph. She didn't need to gloat. Her skill had already spoken for her. She was now seen mentoring younger A-10 pilots, not in a classroom, but on the flight line, her hands showing them the subtle nuances of the aircraft, her voice a low murmur explaining the delicate balance between lift, drag, and ordnance deployment. She taught them that true mastery came from listening to the machine, not from dominating it. The event created its own artifacts, its own physical legacy. The SEALs she rescued recovered a piece of their shattered concrete bunker, a piece that had been struck by a stray enemy round just inches from their commander's head. On it, they had a small brass plaque engraved, "The Sprite of the Gulch, for thy BRRRT is the kingdom and the power." It was mounted in the central hallway of their command building in Virginia Beach, a sacred relic. And in the advanced flight simulators at Nellis Air Force Base, the impossible flight path she had taken through the Serpent's Gulch was meticulously recreated. It was now the final test for all weapons school graduates, the capstone exercise that separated the great pilots from the legendary ones. It was officially designated Exercise 77B, but everyone, from the newest airman to the highest-ranking general, called it the Rostova Run. Years passed. General Marcus Thorne stood at a podium, delivering his retirement speech. His hair was completely white now, his face more deeply lined, but his voice had lost none of its authority. He spoke of his long career, of the changes in technology and the constants of warfare. Towards the end of his speech, his gaze drifted to a point in the distance, his mind clearly replaying a memory. "In all my years," he began, his voice softening, "the greatest lesson I ever learned came not in a classroom or from a manual, but from watching a drone feed in a dark room, hundreds of miles from the fight. I saw a warrior remind an entire generation of us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. I saw that true competence is a quiet thing. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need validation. It simply is." I watched as one pilot, in one aircraft, confronted not only a determined enemy, but the far more dangerous enemy of our own prejudice, our own arrogant assumptions. He never mentioned Captain Rostova by name. He didn't have to. Everyone in that audience knew the story. It had become institutional folklore, a foundational myth for the new era. It was taught as a mandatory case study at the Air Force Academy, not just in tactics, but in leadership and ethics. At the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, new SEAL candidates were shown the redacted comms logs from the mission as a lesson in the critical importance of inter-service trust and the folly of judging an asset by its appearance. The phrase, "Remember the Gulch," became a common refrain in mission briefings, a stark reminder to listen to the quiet professional in the room, to value substance over style, and to never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. The story had transcended the event itself. It had become a parable, a teaching tool that shaped the mindset of thousands of warriors. The legacy of Captain Rostova's 90 seconds of brutal, beautiful artistry was not a medal or a promotion. It was a fundamental shift in culture, a course correction that guided the entire military toward a deeper understanding of what it means to be a professional. The true impact of that day was not measured in the 578 lives saved, as monumental as that was. It was measured in the countless future mistakes that were never made. It was in the young fighter pilot who listened patiently to the advice of an older, more experienced crew chief. It was in the Special Forces operator who trusted the unconventional plan of a female intelligence analyst. It was in the commander who chose the right tool for the job, not just the newest or the fastest. Captain Eva Rostova's legacy wasn't what she did. It was what she inspired others to do. She remained a ghost, a quiet professional who deflected praise and continued to fly missions that would never be public knowledge. She never wrote a book. She never gave a speech. Her greatness was never captured in a headline, only in the hushed, reverent tones of those who knew the truth, and in the continued existence of the men who owed her their lives. Her silence was her monument. Her calm was her anthem. Her competence was her history. The story teaches us that a legacy is not what you leave behind in stone or on paper, but what continues forward in the actions and beliefs of others. It's the standard that is raised, the assumption that is broken, the quiet competence that echoes through generations, inspiring others to be better, to be calmer, to be more professional. The loudest noise in the Serpent's Gulch that day was not the roar of the GAU-8 cannon. It was the deafening sound of a paradigm shifting, of arrogance being silenced by undeniable, irrefutable skill. It was the sound of a lesson being learned, a lesson that would save countless more lives in the years to come, all because one pilot understood that true strength is quiet, true precision is calm, and true worth is proven not with words, but in the crucible of action. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.